Hello and welcome. A US military drone has been taken down over the Black Sea by Russian fighter jets. What does that mean? Does this mean it all will escalate into World War III? Now, while that would help keeping the suspense up in this video, while it would help me with clicks, it would be going down the BuzzFeed road. So I take it up front to you. No, this will not mean World War III, but it still means a lot, and what it means in this video. Reconnaissance flights over the Black Sea are fairly routine. There's nothing new about that. They happened before the war, but since the war, they happen far more often. Since then, it has not been the first escalation. There have been cases where Russian fighter jets got extremely close to Allied planes. The talk here is about 15 feet or 4.6 meters that it became close, but a much even greater, more grave incident was when close to a British RC-135 rivet joint reconnaissance plane, which is unarmed, a Russian fighter jet launched a missile. Supposedly it was an air-to-air missile and it was beyond visual range, but well within range of the plane. When the British protested, the Russians claimed it was a technical error. How likely that is, but whatever. They tried to get out. Now, what happened this time? This time, two Russian Sukhoi 25 fighter jets, which are visible here, were following the drone for 30 to 40 minutes. Then they flew in front of the drone. They released jet fuel, probably trying to kill the engine of the drone to bring it down without having to shoot it down. When that failed, one of the jets actually rammed the drone. It seems to have rammed the drone where the propeller is, so the propeller was probably bent, the engine was broken, it could no longer propel itself, so the Americans crashed the drone into the Black Sea. The Russians were saying both of their jets came home safely, even though one of the jets obviously have to sustained some damage, but they also say the transponder was off. Now, what does that mean? According to international law, there is absolutely no right for the Russians to do that. It brings with itself the risk of an escalation. But according here, this is from a German media, so I'm going to translate it to you really quick, or I can summarize it. They themselves emphasize that they did not use their weapons. They didn't use their cannon, the cannon on board of the planes, and obviously it would have been far safer to simply shoot down the drone with the cannon inside of the Sukhoi 27 or with an air-to-air missile. They did not do this. As they didn't do it, as they rammed it to take it down, they kept themselves under the escalation threshold of using kinetic means. This was obviously much more risky to them because the planes aren't meant to ram into a propeller. That could have not just damaged the plane, it might have brought the plane down. And even while the pilot has an ejection seat, that still doesn't mean he 100% has a survival rate. Using the injection seat is already dangerous, doing it over water even more. So they took some considerable risk bringing down the drone without shooting it down, so they could avoid to force the Americans to react. Also, it was an unmanned plane, so shooting it down or taking it down means that no American soldier dies, which also would have forced the Americans to react in some ways. By deliberately not using kinetic means, they kept the lid on the escalation, and there's no real justification for the American side to shoot down a Russian plane in response to this. Now, why did they do it? First of all, they wanted to send a sign, that's obvious, but there's another thing, a possibility that they try to keep some secret. Now, more about this later in this video. Now, first of all, let's talk about the planes that were used. This here is a Russian Sukhoi 27. It's basically the ancestor of a long line of planes that are in use now. The Sukhoi 27 itself, also the Sukhoi 33, which is a carrier-based plane. All the Chinese J-11, J-15, J-16 are all so closely related to it that they are also being called flankers. The Russian Su-30 and the Su-35 are both very closely looking. They are basically further developments on this, and even their version of something which you could compare maybe with the Strike Eagle, the Sukhoi 34 is also closely related to this plane. But what the Sukhoi 27 is in the flanker line, it's the oldest of their planes. And we've seen them use in Ukraine war, mostly by Ukraine itself, who still has them in inventory, and it's actually their strongest fighter jet, while the Russians have not. I have not seen any proof of the Russians using Sukhoi 27 in Ukraine, even though that might still have happened. The interesting part, though, is that it's the oldest item they have, and the Russian Navy, which has a base obviously in Sevastopol, still is operating Sukhoi 27 also as interceptors for its naval bases. From what I found, they only have 18 left in their inventory, so it seems that they're currently being put out of service. So using one of them for a mission like this, which will leave the plane damaged, is obviously far less cost intensive, far less risky when it comes to the overall fleet than using a more modern item, because it seems like the time for the last Sukhoi 27 within the Navy within the Russian Navy is running out anyways. Now, I don't have confirmation that it was actually a Navy Sukhoi 27, but it seems at least very likely. Now let's come to the drone that was hit by it. It's the MQ-9 Reaper. It's the successor of the very successful and famous MQ-1 Predator. That's the drone that was used to strike all the terrorists in the stories you heard in the news stories in the past, be it Taliban in Afghanistan, be it Pakistan, be it Somalia. Usually it was the Predator, and the Reaper is a more modern version of it, or basically developed out of it. It is bigger, it has more weapon loads, it is more capable, but it still shows the clear resemblance of the plane. Unlike the Predator, it can carry a heavier weapon load. You see here that should probably be 2 Hellfire missiles, and that's a Paveway, a laser-guided bomb in this regard. It also, so while it's made very well for close air support, it is also very suited for reconnaissance, and in this mission it's being used over the Black Sea to look into the Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine ever since this war began. Now, obviously, doing reconnaissance mission in international airspace is absolutely legitimate, even if it's likely that the data is being given to Ukraine. Russia will not like it. It's surely an unfriendly act, but it's not a hostile act. It's not an act of war. There are historical precedences that are very famous, which can be compared to this. For instance, the German battleship Bismarck. Many of you will know that it was sunk by the British when it left its harbor to go on its last voyage. On its maiden voyage, which would also be its last voyage, it was first spotted by a Swedish ship, who then reported it, and from there the news got out to the British. Sweden was a neutral power in World War II, so a neutral country gave the information that helped the British realize the most powerful German battleship is about to try to enter into the Atlantic, which allowed the British to react to in the end, not just lead to the battle in the Denmark Strait, but also to the sinking of the Bismarck. So that is nothing new in this regard. It's not an act of war, and Russia can't really do much about it. So there are historic precedences in this regard, but we have a special case now, because the question would be, why did they take out the drone, the Reaper now? Why didn't they do it before? And what was the reason to take this escalatory step? And there comes into play a very interesting factor, a very interesting possibility, and this is this here. What we see here under a Reaper is the Gorgon Stair. This is a reconnaissance module that carries a lot of tiny cameras in it, and in total it achieves 8.1 gigapixels or 180 megapixels in infrared. So this allows to capture so much information that actually its satellite link is not sufficient to transmit the information. That's why in one of the pods it carries a ton of storage space to store the insane amount of data those cameras are collecting, to later be able to use them for intelligence gathering, like it's some reconnaissance planes of the 50s or so that is actually flying with a physical camera. This drone has to land to submit its information, and there could be the interesting part while this has happened. Now, obviously, we're entering into the realm of speculation here. But it's possible that taking down the Reaper here was meant to prevent the transmission of data that to hide some item. Now, what is possible to hide here, what the Russians wanted to hide here, or if they even wanted to hide something here, is pure speculation. I cannot emphasize this enough. I have no confirmation that the Reaper was actually carrying Gordon's stair at this very moment. As is some kind of breaking news here, we don't have any new information, any deeper information yet. But the interesting part is I tried to find out how far that can actually reach. Now, I looked, for instance, on the website here of the companies, and a ton of interesting informations, detail and everything. Nowhere could I find how far they actually can look to the side, which is obviously decisive. So I took a calculator here, which is taking the distance by that an object can look to the side by its altitude. Now, if we take the regular flying distance, the regular altitude is 7,500 meters altitude. The plane is using to in 7.5 kilometers altitude is the regular operating altitude. In this regard, it would allow the Gordon Reaper to look 309 kilometers to the side. As obviously a lot of you are Americans and have no clue about the metric system, I quickly calculated it anew. So the regular operating height is 25,000 feet, which means it could look to the side by 194 miles. If we take the maximum altitude of 50,000 feet, that would add up to a whopping 444 kilometers, which is 274 miles. Now, obviously, the maximum altitude is extremely unlikely or close to being impossible, because usually maximum altitude means that's the maximum altitude the plane can go level flight. But with big pods like this that not only are heavy but also have a big air resistance, it's close to impossible to reach the regular maximum flight ceiling in this regard. So if we take the 309 kilometers, or what was it? 194 miles. I've taken the example here just to see this is more or less out of the 12 miles, 12 mile zone, out of Crimea. This would allow a Reaper that's flying here at regular service altitude with a Gorgon stair to basically look along the whole front line in the south, to look over there. Obviously, depending on clouds, depending on fog, all of those conditions. But at least in theory, that should allow it to look to the side. As we can see, the cameras can more or less be level. So it should allow the Reaper to actually take pictures of the whole battlefield along the whole front line in the south here and give informations. Now, that doesn't mean the Russians took that drone down because it had information that was crucial. They might have found another reason to do that. That doesn't indicate anything. But if we hear about a big operation that is surprisingly breaking out within the next week or two, we might have found the reasons why the drone was taken down this very day in particular. But I said there is no confirmation about this. It's as of now, I just try to connect the dots, and that doesn't mean it's necessarily 100% true. I should expect that from now on, the Americans will likely start escorting drones, trying to keep them safe, but they won't be stopped by this. So whatever time the Russians gained with taking down the drone will only last a few days until the Americans have set up a system to allow for the reconnaissance flights to be safe and continue. I hope you enjoyed this short video, this breaking news. If you did so, please hit the likes button, leave a comment for the algorithm. It really helps the channel. If you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. Recommend the channel to your friends and acquaintances to help it grow. And this channel is only possible because of the support from viewers like you. So if you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. Thank you very much to everybody already supporting it. And that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.